Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news and welcome back Formula 1. It is race week yet again for the first time in a very long time, and Melbourne will host the season opener for the first time since 2019. McLaren are certainly the favourites this weekend. Oscar Piastri may be able to win his home Grand Prix as a result, but which team will be closest, or will McLaren even be ahead? Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, they are in the chasing pack, and Ferrari believe the amount of sensors they had on their car in Bahrain may have contributed to their car being heavier than some of their other rivals. Maybe that's the sandbagging these other teams were talking about. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. So much to get into today. Here's George Russell on his flight out to Melbourne. As I said yesterday, the teams and drivers, they try to get there if they can a few days early because they want to get the jet lag out of their system. They want to hit the ground running for the new year. This is the Ferrari garage, among others. They've got everything set up and ready to go now. And the weather is very interesting. We'll get back to that towards the end of the video, but there is a good chance of rain, certainly on the Sunday, and there will be some serious temperature fluctuations we're expecting throughout the weekends. Now, it's Melbourne. The weather can be pretty tricky to predict, so we'll see what actually happens when we get to the Grand Prix. Speaking of Grand Prix, have a look at this. So you guys may be familiar now with this track. This is the Madrid circuit. As of today, according to Autosport, it officially has a name, and you've heard of the Red Bull Ring, you've heard of Sebring, you've heard of the Hungaro Ring. Well, welcome the Madring. That's apparently what it's going to be called. So yes, one of my favourite tracks in the history of Formula 1, I'm sure. It's got, well, a couple of roundabouts that you go rounds. It's got plenty of corners with no real overtaking zones. It's a beautiful industrial estate. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really make a worse track than this if I tried. And I don't know, maybe it'll be better than I predict, but I'm not expecting much, especially because I'm one of those people that really likes Catalonia and the current Barcelona circuit, certainly after the changes, to get rid of what I think is a legendary track in exchange for another street circuit, which looks horrific. And then, you know, it's not like they've called it anything great, have they? Let's be honest. The Madrid Ring, the Madring, it's just, oh. I mean, I guess it was inevitable they were going to call it this, but I still feel like it's kind of tragic. But just have a look at this track and tell me where you are going to overtake. Like, just actually think about it for a second. Because even this corner here, big straight, chicane, long kind of curvy straight, presumably with DRS or whatever. But this corner is not a heavy braking zone if that is going to be a kink around a roundabout. And then where else do you go? I don't know. I don't want to look at this anymore. It's too ugly. It's just way too ugly. Now, let's talk Alpine. They are cracking on for the new year. They may be the closest contender to the front runners. That's not an impossibility. We've not got great expectations for Aston Martin. It could be Williams as well. Quick note though, Jack Doohan, there have been rumours that his time at the team is not going to last for too much longer. Whether that's going to be 5 races, 10 races, 2 races, 1 race, we don't really know. There have been rumours that maybe after Australia it's over, and Colapinto will be there. There was some speculation on this, whether Alpine would bring him along, because they don't necessarily need him there, especially because, you know, it's a long way away in Australia, lots of travel. Alpine have plenty of reserve drivers, plenty of options. There was some speculation as to whether Colapinto would even go. But yeah, he is going to be there. He's going to be in Australia and in China as the reserve driver. So he will be in the garage, putting some pressure on Jack Doohan. Alpine also have got pressure put on themselves because their correlation between their wind tunnel and their reality has not been great. And apparently they've only recently discovered that for quite some time now, there's been an error in their data, which has been leading them down a certain path, which has not been giving them great results. So presumably they fixed that. They could be better than even they've looked. I mean, they've actually done, despite the disaster class of the start of 2024, a very good job turning it around. If you'd have told me after Bahrain testing last year that Alpine would get a 2-3, a double podium at a race like Brazil, I'd have said, what are you talking about? And sure, that was chaotic, and you run that race again 100 times, probably doesn't happen one more time. But still, they did excellently towards the end of the season, Alpine, and maybe if they can make some progress here with the Mercedes engine coming on board next year, they could be a threat again in the championship. That's certainly the way that Flavio Briatore sees it, but this is Jody Eggington, and he has been the technical director for Racing Bulls, Toro Rosso, RB, V-Carb, whatever you want to call them, AlphaTauri, for some time, and he is now departing, well, kind of. So he's leaving Racing Bulls. A pretty big deal, first of all, to say that the season starts this week and your technical director has left, right? So, like, that is a big deal for whatever team you're talking about. Now, he has left to join Red Bull Advanced Technologies. Now, this is effectively an entity that designs parts for both Red Bull and for Racing Bulls, as they are now called. So, and he will be their engineering director as of next month. He spent the last 10 years at Toro Rosso and was TD. So, you know, what does that mean? Effectively, it's a promotion, I guess, right? Like, you know, he's been there for some time. That's at least how it seems to me. Whether it actually is a promotion, you know, how good the Racing Bulls car is going to be this season, how much Red Bull really care about how good their sister team is. It's more about developing their drivers, really, especially Isaac Hadjar for this year. We'll see whether Arvid Lindblad gets a drive there next year, for example, but still a big story when you've got a technical director leaving just before the season starts. There was a lot of drama as well about the V10s over the last few days. Hamilton has, well, made this point, frankly, for decades, that he wants the V10s back in Formula 1, and we know that Mr. Mohammed Ben Sulayem over at the FIA, probably the only thing he has said in the last 6 months that I agree with is bring back the V10s. Talk about sustainable fuel. Look, there's loads of different angles to the story, what actually is best for Formula 1 and other motorsports. But if you asked most people, they'd probably tell you, would they prefer a V10 with sustainable fuel, if that's possible, than, you know, a mostly hybrid or electrical engine and all the problems that generates. I think we kind of know our answer then. If you talk to the drivers, they'll tell you the same thing. Now, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, he was saying, yeah, we're considering bringing back the V10s. Now, whether that's really the FIA's place or his, you know, position to speak on it now, especially because we're getting another several years from 26 to 29, presumably, of the hybrid component of the engine, because the manufacturers, that's what they wanted to see. And yet before that even happens, the president is talking about, yeah, probably not the best idea. We should move away to some degree. Max, though, agrees. Look, the majority of the reasoning behind why the drivers agree is not necessarily the sound. I think from the fans' perspective, the sound is a big deal. But from my side and from any of the driver's side, it's more about the weight. If you bring back the V10s rather than the heavy batteries and stuff, the cars get lighter. They can therefore potentially be smaller, more agile, and beneficial in various ways. So Max is on board with this as well, right? Like, obviously, Max and Ben Sulayem don't see eye to eye on many things, but on this one, they do. Although he does say the following: it's a nice idea, but better not to shout so many things. It's better to solve things behind the scenes. So it's not really possible right now for Max to say something without it, you know, say something positive about Ben Sulayem without a little bit of a dig in there. Whether he's going to get fined for this, who knows, right? I mean, like, is this causing moral injury to the FIA? Is Ben Sulayem going to read this quote and say, wow, a little bit, you know, Max, a bit spicy. Maybe that's caused me some moral injury, in which case I will be launching you a $10,000 fine or whatever it is for the first offence. So, yeah, time will tell whether anything happens on this one. But we've got some people agreeing, and I think understandably Max is saying, yeah, sure, talk about it all you want, but let's actually take some action, guys. Maybe that would be the way to go. Toto Wolff says it's premature to talk about returning, and this is an absolute classic Mercedes PR response, right? Do you guys think that if Toto Wolff himself personally as an individual could choose to go back to the V10s, he would? Probably the answer is yes. I think most Formula 1 fans would. But he is an owner of the team, he's a Mercedes man, and Mercedes are looking very good, we think, for the 2026 engine regulations, certainly on the hybrid component of that, and in terms of their future competitiveness, and in terms of what Mercedes actually want out of the championship from their own development perspective. This seems to be the way that they may want to lead. So, of course, Toto's going to have a different perspective. That is just being a good team principal, I think, although sometimes it may feel like being a bad politician. Let's talk about the teams, though, and where they sit right now. Because Ferrari, on paper, probably have the strongest driver pairing. Fred Vasseur says that I do not want them to be best friends, nor do I want them to be enemies. They need to be rivals. First and foremost, that's how it should stay. They should always try to outdo each other and be driven by that, which I think is a very healthy approach. Of course, it's healthy until things get very controversial internally. And that will, you know, happen more likely if the car is as good as the McLaren or in that type of position. Right now, the teams, well, they are hopeful that they can be competitive with Lando and Oscar, but that may not be likely at the start of the season if what we saw in Bahrain is true, especially because Bahrain historically not a great track for McLaren. It was very windy, difficult conditions compared to normal. I think really the only hope that some of these other teams are holding on to is that those conditions were not fully representative of how time will tell in Formula 1. I think that's possibly true, but we'll not know the answer really to those questions until this upcoming weekend. This is crazy though. In the hybrid era, since 2014, 2019, whatever, Lewis Hamilton was on pole position many a time. In fact, since it's been in the hybrid era, Hamilton's been on pole. He's only won it twice. I think he's only won twice around Albert Park, Hamilton, but he's been on pole 8 times, including 6 consecutives between 2014 and 2019. Pretty remarkable stuff, to be honest. And we return there again for the season opener. So whether that's likely or not, who knows, but I thought it was a quite remarkable stat to bring back. This was the big article, right? In the world of Formula 1, there's not many sources that you can readily trust. I think Andrew Benson at the BBC is pretty good. I trust the guys at Auto Racer, De Kessler among others, when they talk about Ferrari. When Eric Van Haren's talking about the Verstappens, he's often got some inside angles there. And there are a few others that are certainly worth listening to. The main one, though, really is AMUS, right? When AMUS talk about stuff like, the German publication, they tend to be one of the more trustworthy publications you're going to find. Doesn't mean they're always right, sure, everyone can make mistakes, but still, it's worth listening to what they have to say. And today's article was about Mercedes and their performance in Bahrain with respect to the other teams. And, AMUS will have talked to engineers. They will have talked to people in the paddock and got a read on what the data says, because the teams, Bahrain feels like quite a long time ago now. I mean, it was a good few weeks ago, towards the end of February. But the teams have had the last couple of weeks to really dive into the data and draw the conclusions they can, given all of the variables that exist in the world of Formula 1. And Mercedes are confident that they've made a serious stride. They are, however, seriously concerned that McLaren were way quicker than even, Mercedes expected them to be. And Ferrari and Red Bull seemingly are in a pretty similar boat right now. So let's go through what they have to say. This is the start of the article before I'll then share the rest of it elsewhere. The ground effect era has not gone according to plan for Mercedes so far. With the introduction of the current regulations in 22, the great series of successes ended after 8 constructors titles in a row. With the new AMG W16, they finally want to attack at the front again. The car has some aggressive changes, the new side pods, the changes to the front suspension, effectively taking a McLaren-style concept, but not taking it as far as McLaren have. McLaren have definitely gone to more extremes. But this is what the rest of the article had to say, and I appreciate it's not particularly pretty to read, but, I'll read it for you, so keep it nice and simple. So they're pretty happy about the Mercedes in general, right? It went around the track like clockwork. They had a small hiccup on the last session morning, on the Friday morning. They changed the battery before realizing actually they didn't need to change it. They had a small error message that was happening, which actually was not a problem with the battery at all. So, reliability-wise, they're looking very good. Expectations were met in terms of performance. The data collected on the track corresponded to the values previously calculated in the simulations. The feedback from both drivers was accordingly positive. The engineers also expressed cautious optimism that the new car would no longer show the major fluctuations in its predecessor, which, depending on the conditions, sometimes drove all opponents into the ground and then lagged hopelessly behind again. This is what Andrew Shovlin says. The team worked hard over the winter to improve the weaknesses. Judging by the first signs, we seem to have made good progress in these areas. In Bahrain, there were no real outliers. The car seemed more stable. There were temperature fluctuations, but the car wasn't massively inside and outside of the window. So, it's too early to give the all clear because there have not been the crazy fluctuations such as Budapest and Las Vegas on one end or the other. But there is a feeling that Mercedes have made massive strides. The issue is, it's a relative game in Formula 1, and is it going to be good enough to take down the McLaren? Because this is what AMUS say on the McLaren, and then also the Ferrari as well, and the Red Bull. In this case, McLaren seems to have pulled well ahead of its direct competitors. The Mercedes engineers were shocked to discover that the gap on the long runs was between half a second and a whole second. Now, we mentioned this the other day. If it's true that the gap was actually, up to a second a lap, that is difficult to believe. Let's put it straight up, right? Difficult to believe that in the final year of these regulations, it would be possible for a team to have that level of advantage. Now, Russell, when they did his race sim compared to Piastri, finished about 20 seconds behind. That would put it at, let's say 0.3 a lap over roughly a 50, whatever it is, lap Grand Prix at Bahrain. when Antonelli raced against Norris in kind of the same situations, it was more like 30 seconds. So again, there you're talking maybe half a second. So, that's a big difference, sure, but there is a hope maybe that the conditions weren't especially representative and the gap will automatically be therefore reduced. Now, this was the interesting paragraph to me talking about the other teams, because everyone knows it's McLaren and then it's Merc, Red Bull, Ferrari in some order or another. We really don't know who's going to be the second fastest. On paper, maybe Melbourne is a very different story. But Ferrari, there was talk the other day from Red Bull, from, even Mercedes, but certainly McLaren, that they weren't really convinced that Ferrari's somewhat underwhelming performance in the test in Bahrain was truly representative. And there was a theory that was going around that the Ferrari was running with more weight than the other cars, and that's why, at least in part, it looked somewhat weaker than maybe it otherwise would have done. Now, Ferrari apparently are saying, now, AMUS described this as an excuse, maybe it's translation, but Ferrari also used the excuse that the SF25 was carrying a lot of excess weight because of the many sensors. Now, I imagine other teams were using sensors too, but maybe Ferrari to a far greater extent than some of the other teams were, to such a point that they believe that the extra, maybe several kilograms they were running the car with as a result of this compared to their rivals was a differentiating factor. So that might be something to keep in mind, whether they had things on the floor, other parts of the car that were basically adding to the weights that otherwise was not necessary, I suppose. That's interesting to hear that Ferrari think, well, maybe it's not like they were sandbagging, right? I don't want to go that far, but there is probably some truth to the idea that the delta between Ferrari and McLaren isn't as big as maybe it appeared based on the data in Bahrain. But again, we're not really going to find out for a couple of days' time. Now, Max didn't do a full racing sim, but also that was a Red Bull issue, right? Because they didn't get the setup right. There's also a feeling that Mercedes didn't quite get their setup right either, but maybe McLaren did. So, it's very interesting to think about. The question is how close McLaren was to the ideal performance. The pursuers should not assume that the papaya racer has already reached its best form. So, AMUS are basically saying McLaren have a rocket ship on their hands. But it's early days. We've made premature conclusions before from testing. This weekend is going to tell us a fair bit, but even then, Melbourne can be a very interesting circuit in many ways. It's certainly a track that is not particularly similar to Bahrain, so who knows what's going to happen. McLaren are the favourites. Oscar Piastri could win his home Grand Prix, but a race result where it's Lando and Oscar crossing the line at relatively similar time, with Max then further behind, with George, Lewis, Charles, wherever further behind, that also doesn't seem entirely implausible, because Ferrari, they've also got their own problems to solve. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing to mention though, we've got to consider the possibility of some absolute chaos in Australia, because there are 6 rookies on the grid. Now, Lawson, is he really a rookie? He's driven for a long time. Okay, you can have the conversation on that. Behrman, of course, has driven now in 3 Grand Prix, so technically not a rookie, although he kind of is. But we've got Bortoletto, we've got Isaac Hadjar, we've got, of course, Kimi Antonelli, and we've got Jack Doohan on the grid, and it's the first race of the season, and the sun might be kind of low in the sky in terms of, being blinding, as we saw with Carlos Sainz a couple of years ago, and it might rain. This is just here on BBC Weather. This is the weather on the Saturday, 37 degrees Celsius, hot, sunny, expected maybe conditions in Melbourne this time of the year. But this is the Sunday, and you can see the weather's all over the place. Wednesday we're talking thunderstorms with decent chance of rain. Thursday, Friday, cloud with some sunny intervals. But the Sunday, as it stands, there is, according to BBC and other sources as well, roughly a 70% chance of some sort of rainfall during the course of when the Grand Prix will be happening. And if it stays like this, man, we are going to be in for an entertaining weekend, to say the very least. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.